All right, welcome to the deep dive. We're all about getting to the heart of things here, really understanding them.
Yeah, no time for just skimming the surface, right?
Right. Today, we're diving deep into something central to Buddhist thought, dependent origination. And think of this, by the way, as a fast track to grasping this concept.
A concept, I might add, that the Buddha considered absolutely essential for enlightenment.
We'll be drawing on some really insightful writings from Ajahn Brahmavamso, who has some fascinating takes on this.
We're going to try to make this as clear and direct for you as we can. Cut through any potential confusion and present this core teaching in a way that not only makes sense, but also has a real impact.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't just some obscure philosophical idea. The Buddha himself famously said, one who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma. One who sees the Dhamma sees dependent origination.
That's from the Majjhima Nikaya. And it shows just how vital this concept is in Buddhism.
So it's pretty important then.
It is. And the implications of really grasping it are profound. It's believed to be a kind of delusion-shattering moment. It marks when someone steps onto the Buddhist path as a stream enterer or sotapanna. And that's not just a label. It signifies that you have this unshakable faith in the Buddha, his teachings, the Dhamma, and the community of practitioners, the Sangha.
So it's more than just intellectual understanding.
It is. Stream enterers also live by a strong ethical code, and importantly for our discussion, they developed a deep understanding of dependent origination and how cause and effect work.
Cause and effect, that seems to be a key element here.
Absolutely. And this understanding puts them on a path to full enlightenment, potentially within, get this, a maximum of 7 lifetimes.
7 lifetimes. Okay, so we're talking about a really significant shift in understanding here, not something to take lightly.
No, not at all. But it's worth noting, and John Bromlove also points this out too, that dependent origination is a complex idea with many layers. Fully grasping it, really seeing it perfectly, is something those who are already enlightened achieve.
Right. It's not like you just read about it and instantly become an expert.
Right. So our goal today is to lay down a solid foundation, give you a really good starting point.
Jumping off point, yeah.
Exactly. And that brings us to, a question anyone coming across this for the first time might ask. Why even bother? What does understanding dependent origination actually do for me?
Yeah, what's the point?
Well, Ajahn Brahmavamso argues that it provides answers to some really fundamental questions, like, how can there be rebirth without a soul? What is life, truly? And most importantly, why is there so much suffering? And is there a way to end it?
Those are pretty big questions, the kind of questions that keep you up at night, right?
Right. And dependent origination tries to address those head on.
So, okay, how do we unpack this? It sounds kind of abstract.
It's traditionally explained through a sequence of 12 interconnected factors, often presented in the ancient Pali language. It's like, imagine a line of dominoes. Each domino, each factor, is triggered by the one before it. The sequence starts with avijjapakaya sankhara.
Avijjapakaya Sankara. Okay, that's a mouthful. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. Avijja translates to delusion or ignorance. It's essentially a lack of clear understanding about the true nature of things, especially the nature of suffering. Pakaya means because of or conditioned by. And sankhara refers to volitional formations.
Volitional formations, what are those exactly?
Think of them as the mental energy and intention behind our actions. Our thoughts, our words, our deeds that are driven by our will.
Okay, so our intentional actions driven by ignorance or delusion. Got it.
So avijjapakaya sankhara means because of delusion, volitional formations come to be.
Makes sense. And then what happens?
From these volitional formations, sankhara, which are, conditioned by that initial delusion, consciousness arises. That's vina. So the sequence continues, sankarapakaya vinam.
So delusion leads to intentional actions, which then lead to consciousness. What happens next?
From consciousness, vina, as the condition, comes name and form, namarupam.
Name and form, what does that mean?
Well, think of name as the mental aspects, like feelings, perceptions, intentions, while form refers to the physical body.
Okay, so consciousness gives rise to both our mind and our body.
Exactly. So next in the sequence, vinampakaya namarupam. From consciousness as condition, name and form arises.
Okay, so then what? Where do mind and body lead us?
From name and form, namarupa as the condition, come the 6 sense bases, that's salayatana. These are the faculties we use to experience the world. The eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and the mind itself, also acting as a sense organ.
So our senses, what role do they play in this whole process?
Well, namarupa pakaya salayatana, from name and form as condition, the 6 sense bases arise. And then these six sense bases, they condition contact, or phassa.
Contact meaning.
It's the coming together of a sense organ, a sense object, and consciousness. So, for example, your eye, the sight of a tree, and your awareness of seeing the tree.
Okay, so it's our senses making contact with the world around us. Then what?
This contact, phassa, conditions feeling, or
The
vedana.
feeling like emotion.
Not exactly. It's more like the pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral sensations that arise from that contact. So the pleasant feeling of a cool breeze on your skin, the unpleasant feeling of a headache, or the neutral feeling of just sitting in a chair.
Right, the raw sensations themselves.
Exactly. So Phassa Vedana, from contact as condition, feeling arises.
And what's next in the chain?
This feeling, Vedana, it conditions craving, tanha.
Craving meaning.
It's a strong desire, a thirst for more of what feels good, or a desire to get rid of what feels bad, or even a desire to hold on to what feels neutral.
Oh, so that feeling of wanting something, wanting more of it, wanting it to stay, wanting it to go away.
Yeah, that's craving in a nutshell. Vedana Tanya, from feeling as condition, craving arises. And this craving, this wanting, it's something we encounter all the time in our daily lives, right?
It is. So what happens after craving arises?
This craving, Tana, it conditions clinging, Upada.
So clinging is different from craving.
It is. Think of clinging as a stronger, more stubborn kind of attachment. It's holding on tightly to things, to ideas, and especially to a sense of self, a sense of me.
Clinging to the idea of me, to my possessions, to my opinions, to my way of life.
Exactly. Tana Pakaya Upadanam, from craving as condition, clinging arises, and it's this clinging that fuels the next stage. Existence, bhava.
Existence as in, like, our continued being.
Exactly. It's the potential for future becoming. The momentum, you could say, that carries us towards rebirth. Upadana Pakai Pava, from clinging as condition, existence arises.
Okay, so existence driven by this clinging to a sense of self. And where does that lead?
It leads to birth.
Adi?
The arising of a new life, a new set of aggregates. Havapakaya Jati, from existence as condition, birth arises.
Birth. So we've gone full circle.
We have. But the cycle doesn't end there. Birth, jati, conditions aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair. The full Pali phrase is Jatipakayo Jaramananam Sokaperdeva Dukadaminas Upayasa Sambhavanti. It's basically saying that birth leads to the whole mass of suffering.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. It sounds pretty bleak, to be honest. But earlier we mentioned that there's a way out of this cycle.
Right, and that's the really important part. Just as this chain of suffering arises through these conditions, it can also cease through their cessation.
So if we can break the chain.
Exactly. If ignorance, avijja, completely ceases, if we truly understand the nature of reality, then volitional formations, sankhara, cease.
The dominoes stop falling.
Yes. And with the cessation of volitional formations, consciousness ceases and so on down the line. When birth, jati, ceases, then aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair also cease. It's the end of the whole mass of suffering.
So it's like reversing the domino effect.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got this 12-link chain. To really get this, we need to look at each of those links in more detail. Let's start at the end with aging and death, something we all experience.
Right. Ajahn Brahmavamso is clear that aging and death, jara-marana, refers to the natural process of growing old, the decline of our physical and mental faculties, and our eventual passing away, the end of this particular life.
Just normal death.
Right, exactly. Not some abstract concept.
And this aging and death are a result of birth, Jati.
Exactly. And birth, in this context, it's not just the single moment of emerging from the womb. It's the entire process of coming into being in a specific realm of existence.
Yeah.
The descent into a womb, the development of our physical and mental components, the acquisition of our senses.
So it's a broader definition of birth.
It is. And the Mahanadana Sutta actually gives examples of these various orders of beings. You've got gods, humans, animals, and so on. For the arising in the human realm coming from the womb, being a key example.
Okay, so birth, in this wider sense, leads to aging and death. Makes sense. What causes birth, then? What's before that in the chain?
That would be existence, bhava.
Existence. This one seems a bit harder to grasp.
It can be. The Buddha actually described three main types of existence. You have sense sphere existence, kamaloka, which includes the human realm and other realms that are driven by, sensory pleasures and suffering. Then you have form sphere existence, rupaloka. These are realms associated with deep meditative states called jhanas. And lastly, you have formless sphere existence, arupaloka. These are realms of pure mental experience based on the formless jhanas.
So these aren't just physical places?
No, they're not. They also describe states of being, particularly ones that can be developed through mental training.
Interesting. So our actions and mental states can actually shape these future existences.
Exactly. To illustrate how this works, the Anguttara Nikaya provides a great analogy. It says our intentional actions, our kamma, the things we do with our body, speech, and mind, are like a field. Our consciousness is like a seed, and our craving acts as the moisture that allows that seed to sprout in a future existence.
So our present actions and desires, they plant the seeds for our future rebirth.
That's the idea.
Wow, that's a powerful image. And what leads to this existence, this bhava?
Clinging, or upadana. The Buddha outlined 4 main kinds of clinging. Clinging to sensual pleasures, clinging to wrong views, misunderstandings about reality, clinging to rules and rituals, ineffective or harmful practices, and clinging to the belief in a permanent independent self.
That last one seems particularly relevant. Clinging to a sense of me. What's driving that clinging?
Craving, tanha. And this isn't just a general wanting. The Buddha identified 6 classes of craving. Craving for forms like sights, for sounds, for smells, for tastes, for tactile sensations, and for mental objects or ideas.
So it's that constant seeking of pleasant experiences and avoiding unpleasant ones.
Exactly. It's this constant pull towards what we find agreeable and pushing away what we don't like.
And this craving arises from feeling, Vedana.
That's right. And feeling itself is categorized based on the 6 types of sensory contact. So you have the feeling that arises from seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. These feelings can be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral.
So it's our immediate experience of the world through our senses that fuels these desires. What comes before feeling, then?
Contact, phassa. This is simply the meeting of one of our 6 sense bases, like an eye or an ear, with its corresponding sense object, like light or sound, and consciousness. There are 6 types of contact, one for each sense base.
Okay, so the senses interacting with the world, pretty straightforward. What conditions this contact?
The 6 sense bases themselves, salayatana, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, as a foundation for our sensory experiences.
And what gives rise to these sense bases?
That would be name and form, namarupa.
Name and form again, so reminding us, what does that include?
Name encompasses the non-physical aspects, so things like feelings, perceptions, volitions, meaning our intentions or will, satana, contact, phassa, and attention, manasikara, while form refers to the physical aspect. So the 4 fundamental elements, earth, water, fire, air, and the material world derive from them, including our bodies.
So it's the interplay of our mental and physical existence. And what conditions this mind-body complex, this namarupa?
Consciousness, vina. The Buddha described 6 types of consciousness, each one linked to one of the 6 sense bases. You have eye consciousness, ear consciousness, and so on. It's the awareness that arises when a sense base and a sense object come together.
So we're getting close to the beginning of the chain now. What conditions consciousness?
Volitional formations, sankhara. Remember, these are our intentional actions of body, speech, and mind, driven by our will or intention, satana. The Buddha outlined 3 types: bodily volitional formations, our physical actions; verbal volitional formations, our speech; and mental volitional formations, our thoughts and intentions.
So it's our actions and intentions that shape our consciousness.
Exactly. And these actions, whether wholesome, unwholesome, or neutral, they create the momentum for future experiences and for future rebirth.
Okay, so we're back at volitional formations. What's the root cause of these? What's at the very beginning of the chain?
Ignorance of Ija. It's the foundation of the whole cycle.
And what exactly does this ignorance consist of?
It's fundamentally a misunderstanding of the 4 Noble Truths. Not understanding the reality of suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path leading to the cessation of suffering. It's this deep-seated misapprehension about the nature of reality.
So it all starts with this fundamental lack of understanding about suffering. We've made quite a journey through these 12 factors.
We have. But it's important to remember that the Buddha didn't just describe the 12 links. He also explained the principle of causality itself. This is known as iddhapākkhayata.
And what's the essence of this principle?
It's captured in this statement. When this exists, that exists. From the arising of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that does not exist. From the cessation of this, that ceases.
It's like a basic principle of cause and effect, but Ajahn Brahmavamso emphasizes an important point about this causality. It's not always immediate.
That's right. In Buddhist causality, there can be a considerable delay between a cause and its effect. It's not always a direct one-to-one instantaneous reaction.
So it's not like flicking a light switch.
No, it's more like planting a seed. The fruit doesn't appear immediately.
Right, it takes time.
It does. In the same way, actions we do now can have consequences that ripen much later, even in future lives. Think about the link between birth and death. There can be many years in between.
And this idea of a time lag, it relates to those terms sandithika and akalika. Those words refer to things visible in this very lifetime, right?
Exactly. Sometimes these terms are mistakenly understood to mean immediate. However, as the Paticca Sutta clarifies, sandithika means visible in this life, as opposed to consequences that only manifest after death.
Okay, visible in this life.
And akalika, meaning not bound by time, basically shares this meaning in this context. Even though dependent origination can span multiple lifetimes, each individual factor and the causal relationships between them, they can be observed and experienced in our current life.
So even though there's a time lag, we can still see these principles at work in our own lives.
Precisely. We see birth, we experience aging and death, we feel sensations that lead to desires, and so on.
Right, it's not just some far-off theoretical concept. Now, Ajahn Brahmavamso also connects this Buddhist understanding of causality to Western logical concepts. You know, things like necessary and sufficient conditions. Can you explain that a bit?
Sure. So a necessary condition is a cause without which the effect cannot occur, like oxygen for a fire. This lines up with the second part of the Buddhist formula. When this does not exist, that does not exist.
So without oxygen, there's no fire.
Exactly. And a sufficient condition is a cause that, when present, will always produce the effect, like a spark for dry tinder. This corresponds to the first part of the Buddhist formula. When this exists, that exists.
So the spark guarantees the fire.
Right.
Okay, so if we look at the 12 links in dependent origination, are all of them both necessary and sufficient conditions for the next one?
Not quite. While some links in the forward progression act as sufficient conditions, like ignorance, avijja, generally leading to volitional formations, sankhara, and birth, jati, inevitably leading to suffering, dukkha, others are not always sufficient.
So some links are more flexible than others.
You could say that. For example, while volitional formations, sankhara, typically conditioned consciousness, vinaya, an enlightened being, an arahant, can act without those actions necessarily leading to future rebirth consciousness.
So their actions don't have the same karmic consequences.
Right. This is called ahusi karma that no longer produces future results. Similarly, clinging, upadana, doesn't automatically lead to continued existence, bhava, after full enlightenment. This is ahosi upadana.
So enlightenment changes the rules of the game.
You could put it that way. And famously, feeling vedana doesn't always result in craving tana. Arhants experience feelings without generating craving. And even in our own lives, not every feeling we have leads to a strong desire.
So there's room for maneuver. It's not completely deterministic.
Exactly. And this understanding also helps clear up a common misconception, the idea that we can just cut the cycle of suffering by being mindful of our feelings and preventing them from turning into craving. While mindfulness is a vital practice, the Buddha taught that the cycle truly ends with a complete eradication of ignorance, avijja, through dependent cessation, not just by managing our immediate reactions to feelings.
So mindfulness alone isn't enough.
It's a crucial part of the path, but it's not the whole story. Now, there's also a specific sutta that's sometimes misinterpreted to argue against dependent origination spanning multiple lifetimes. The Tenet Sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya.
Oh, right. I've heard about that.
Some interpretations take it to mean that our feelings aren't caused by past actions. But if we look closer, we see that the Buddha was actually refuting the Jain belief that all feelings are exclusively the result of past karma. He wasn't denying that the existence of feeling itself is conditioned by past actions.
So he's addressing a specific viewpoint.
He is. It's like, think of a television. The fact that you have a TV, the capacity for feeling, might be due to past causes. But the specific channel you're watching, the particular feeling you're experiencing right now, that isn't solely determined by past events.
That's a helpful analogy. So this sutta doesn't actually contradict the idea of dependent origination operating across lifetimes.
Not at all. In fact, later in the Tenet Sutta, the Buddha describes the origin of feeling as being dependent on descent into the womb, which directly aligns with the Mahanidana Sutta's explanation of consciousness descending into the womb at the start of a new life, further supporting the idea that this process unfolds across multiple existences.
Okay, so we've got a much clearer understanding of what dependent origination is and how it works. Now let's turn to those big questions Ajahn Brahmavamso highlights. First, How does this framework explain rebirth without a permanent soul?
This is a core insight of dependent origination. It reveals this dynamic, impersonal process, empty of any fixed eternal soul or self. This process flows continuously, both within a single lifetime and from one life to the next. It highlights the causal forces at play. On the one hand, delusion and the intentional actions, arising from it, and on the other hand, craving and clinging, which propel a stream of consciousness into a new existence.
So it's not a soul migrating to a new body, but more like a flow of mental energy, driven by these impersonal causes and conditions.
Precisely. Imagine an airport. You have the traveler, consciousness, with a ticket and destination in mind, shaped by and craving. They depart one country, death, and arrive in another, rebirth. Or think of a seed that grows into a plant, which then produces more seeds. There's this continuity of life without a fixed seed soul being passed along. Even way species evolve over time, driven by desires for survival and reproduction and the impact of their environment, it offers a loose analogy for how existence can continue and change without a permanent, unchanging essence.
Those are really helpful analogies, even though, we're using material examples to illustrate a mental process. The idea of consciousness as something momentary and constantly changing, that seems key here.
Absolutely. Deep meditative insight, particularly through the jhanas, allows you to directly experience this fleeting nature of consciousness and see how our intentions and desires act as impersonal forces, guiding its trajectory. Sort of like a current in a river. The realization that consciousness isn't inherently tied to the physical body and can persist beyond death, this reinforces the understanding of rebirth as a continuation driven by these causal factors, rather than the migration of a soul.
It's a pretty radical shift in perspective.
It is, and the Buddha himself acknowledged that this is a deep and subtle truth, often requiring significant mental clarity to fully grasp.
Okay, so on to the second big question. If there's no soul, what exactly is life according to dependent origination? What is it that thinks, feels, and acts?
This addresses a natural concern that arises when we let go of the idea of a permanent self. The Paticca Sutta is really important here. In it, the Buddha explicitly rejects both extreme views: the belief in a permanent, eternal soul and the belief in absolute annihilation, nothingness, after death. Dependent origination offers a middle way between these two extremes.
Okay, so navigating between those seemingly opposite ideas, how does it define what we experience as life?
It explains that cessation is seen. The idea of a persistent, unchanging self is ultimately untenable because everything we might identify as I or mine, it's impermanent, subject to ceasing. This is illustrated by the principle of dependent cessation. At the same time, arising is seen. The idea of absolute nothingness is also incorrect because clearly we experience the arising of life and phenomena. This is explained by dependent origination itself, this continuous arising of interconnected factors.
So life isn't a static entity, a soul, but rather this ongoing process of interdependent arising.
Exactly. It's like, think of a mathematical point. It's a real concept, it exists, but it has no persistence or independent substance. Similarly, our consciousness and our experience of life are real, but they are constantly arising and passing away, moment by moment.
Always changing.
Yes. And the Buddha, he didn't encourage that introspective question, who am I, in the way some other traditions do. He saw it as attending unwisely, leading to further confusion. Instead, the essence of his teaching here is, you are dependent origination. What we've mistakenly clung to as a permanent soul, or dismissed as mere emptiness, is in fact this continuous impersonal flow of cause and effect.
Okay, that's a huge shift in how we normally think about ourselves. Finally, the question that's at the heart of so much spiritual seeking. Why is there suffering and how does it end?
This is arguably the central purpose of dependent origination: to provide a framework for understanding the origin of suffering and the path to its complete cessation. The Buddha's own enlightenment under the Bodhi tree was fundamentally about finding a solution to the pervasive suffering of old age, sickness, and death. And his core insight, as revealed through dependent origination, was jatipakkhaya dukkha. Suffering is conditioned by birth.
So as long as we are born into this cycle of existence, suffering is inevitable.
Exactly. All forms of existence, bhava, within this cycle are inherently linked to suffering. There's no perfect, lasting happiness to be found in any realm of rebirth. The Buddha was quite clear on this. He said he wouldn't recommend even the tiniest bit of continued existence, not even for the briefest moment.
Wow, that's a pretty stark statement. It reminds me of that analogy, existence is like a harsh prison that we try to decorate rather than escape.
Right, and the desire to decorate the prison, to make it more comfortable, that's clinging. Deep meditative states, the jhanas, They offer a glimpse of liberation, vimokkha, revealing that true freedom and bliss lie in the cessation of this cycle of existence. It's important to note, though, even enlightened beings, or arhants, they still experience physical discomfort and pain, but they don't suffer mentally. The ultimate cessation of suffering, nibbana, is described as pavanirodhanibnam, the cessation of existence.
So the goal isn't just to manage suffering, but to actually escape the prison entirely.
Exactly. The Bodhisattva, in his journey to enlightenment, he traced back the causes of existence and birth, moving through craving and clinging, until he identified the root cause, delusion or ignorance of the Four Noble Truths. This fundamental misunderstanding, this is the foundation upon which the whole cycle of suffering rests. And while the Noble Eightfold Path and the practice of jhana are the means to dismantle this delusion and end the cycle, dependent origination itself provides the map, the understanding of how suffering arises and ceases.
It's like a diagnostic tool.
You could say that. In fact, the Buddha described dependent origination as an alternative way of understanding the Second Noble Truth, the origin of suffering, and dependent cessation as an alternative way of understanding the Third Noble Truth, the cessation of suffering.
So to sum up, dependent origination isn't just some interesting philosophical puzzle. It's a profound framework that explains how rebirth happens without a soul. It defines what life truly is as this impersonal, interconnected process. And most importantly, it pinpoints the root cause of our suffering and reveals the possibility of its complete end.
It really is at the heart of the Buddha's teachings, the very essence of the Dhamma. As the Buddha said, to truly see and understand dependent origination is to see the Dhamma, and that clear seeing is the path to the end of suffering.
Wow. This has been a truly insightful deep dive into a really fundamental teaching. We hope this has helped illuminate this crucial aspect of Buddhist philosophy for you, and perhaps it sparked an interest to explore the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path further.
Definitely a good next step.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
And we look forward to seeing you again next time.
See you then.
Bye for now.